people are alone, not by choice, and loneliness is a growing sort of epidemic in our world, and a pandemic in our world
But if
in
it
some
is so
ways.
prevalent in the world, shouldn't we
Mhm.
figure out a way to embrace it and deal with it and cope with it, as opposed to
No,
letting it
no.
overcome us?
No, I think we should figure out ways to reach out more to our fellow human beings and reach out more to people around us in a more meaningful way. I think that, the epidemic of loneliness is an indicator of something that's deeply wrong in our society, and
Do you
that we
think then
need
it's
to.
incumbent on a government to create a branch of the government or an agency that deals with this issue since it's so prevalent?
Well, no, I don't know about that. I mean, I think it already can fit into a variety of different institutions that we already have, education systems, our mental health systems, our educate. I mean, especially education systems. I mean, creating communities and creating new ways of interacting with each other. I mean, we learn that at a very young age, right? The way we structure family, the way we structure our lives, the idea of the nuclear family. How do we move away from that and back to an idea of kinship and relations, right? I mean, I think we're
Is it
starting to
possible
learn.
that loneliness is kind of the other side of an equation, like the yin and the yang? Like without sadness, there can't be happiness. So there's a value in sadness. And even though it doesn't feel good to be sad, it serves its place. Is loneliness the other side of something that we are or we need?
I mean, that's a good question, but I don't think so. I mean, my initial sort of instinctual response to that is that there's nothing that balances loneliness. I mean, sadness in terms of that dichotomy of sadness and happiness. I mean, they balance each other in some ways, right? And I think there is a space for sadness in our world. But I guess the question then is, what would be the yang to loneliness, or the yin to loneliness, right?
Maybe being social, being together, being gregarious. Like some
But that's
people
not
I
a
know
that's not
that
yin yang. That's not yin yang though. That's opposites, right? And then yin yang isn't the idea of opposites. It's the idea of complementarian things that are complementary, right? I don't think that sociability is the complementary to loneliness. I think it's the opposite of loneliness, right?
or
And I
maybe
think
it helps us appreciate being with people or being around people or actually appreciating people.
well,
If
that's
we if
different
we
though. That's different though. I think that's solitude, right? I think solitude is an important skill that people do need to learn, I think, and embrace, right? There's something to be said about being alone in that sort of solitude, sense of solitude, and being in our own minds and being with ourselves, which is a different thing than loneliness. I think we have different words for it: maturity, wisdom, this idea of not only accepting that we may not achieve all of our dreams, but accepting that that's okay, right? I mean, like accepting that what we looking at ourselves and just being comfortable in our skins, right?
yeah.
So yeah,
when
I
when I
think that's.
teach when I teach debating, there's a question that comes up about why is it that older people or old people don't seem to be freaking out about getting older, but young people, if you ask them about getting older, they always act as if older people have one foot in the grave and they're marching towards death. But when older people don't find it so alarming, do you know why that is?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, let me just throw another question at you, like just to sort of maybe complicate that a little bit. We have different phases in our lives where we treat aging in different ways, right? Like when we're 12 years old, we can't wait to be teenagers. When we're teenagers, we can't wait to be, an adult and 20 something. And then at a certain point, we start to see aging in a different way. Like in our 20s, we start to see older people. We don't want to get there in some way. I mean, I don't know if it's, I mean, is it a fear of death? Like if we want to philosophize, get philosophical about it. I mean, as we approach death, our relationship with time changes as we sort of.
Well, is it also has something to do with our energy is waning? And so as nobody tells you that, when you get older, you don't stay the same. You have a different capacity for life. And when you're young, you're full of vim and vigor, and you can take on almost any challenge. But as you get older, the possibilities of what you can achieve just becomes narrowed down.
Well,
And
let's look at it a different way. Let's shift our point of view on that a little bit, right? Like, I mean, rather than look at it as we the vigor of youth is often chaotic, right? I mean, and often a lot of energy is wasted. And we can talk about the all of those years as teenagers and 20 somethings, and we threw our energies at so many different things because we just wanted everything. And a lot of it just didn't go anywhere because we
Yeah,
weren't mature enough to recognize that focused energy,
yeah,
focusing on something is
yeah,
much more productive in the end, right? And that takes
yeah,
maturity, that takes age.
yeah. Yeah, that issue comes up in debating quite often too, with when I'm working with young people. This idea that, when you're young, you're like you said, you're flailing wildly and you don't know where to put all of this crazy energy. But the moment we say, Mark Twain says, the two most important days of your life is the day that you're born, and then the day that you figure out why.
Mhm.
And so that day that you figure out your purpose, why I was born, you get, all of a sudden you have a focus, and
Mhm.
now you know where to put that energy. And so when you have that focus and you know what to do with that energy, know where to direct it, that means in every day after that, you're marching towards your goal. And that makes you
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
happy,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
and not so anxious about life.
yeah. I mean, the only caveat I would place on that, and I agree with you, learning what you want out of life is such an important thing, right? But at the same time, I think, what a person wants out of life changes as well and can change. And we should always be willing to change gears and go in a new direction. There's no reason at any age to decide to change gears and go in a new
Oh,
direction.
people are not entitled to their opinions. Rather, people's opinions are a symptom of their entitlement.
Mm.
It's
Ooh,
like a chiasmus, right? It's
ooh,
not the life
interesting.
in my teachers, it's the teachers in my life. Chiasmus.
Yes.
A lot of wisdom appears in this form called chiasmus, but
Yes.
that thought occurred to me because I was listening to an interview with Leonard Cohen, the
Oh, yes,
brilliant
he's everywhere these days.
Canadian, right? Montreal Leonard Cohen. And he was very, I guess, a recluse, and he
Mm,
didn't give many interviews, and he only started talking to people in public when he was running out of money. I think he mismanaged his money towards the end of his
mm,
life, and he needed to make some public appearances. And one of the things I remember, it stood out to me, he said, the reason I'm quiet and reticent and don't talk to people is because our opinions are useless. They're
mm.
just people, it's a blah blah. It doesn't take a great deal of thought to form an opinion. And kind of like what this, Plato said, that opinions are the medium between knowledge and ignorance.
Mm.
And so in terms of debating, I can't trust an opinion to be a valid debating argument because it might be closer to ignorance.
Mhm.
So that's why I always teach the kids, leave your opinions at home and we'll bring something more valuable to the table, insight. What's your thought?
Yeah, I think that this is a tough one because on the one hand, I agree, you can't step out of your own subjective experience, right? We're all just sort of trapped in our heads. And how do we know that what we think isn't just a product of, I don't know, our own circumstances, our own conditions, our own experiences? But at the same time, what do we have if we don't have our opinions? Um, I'd be interested to hear how you distinguish opinion and insight. But from what I feel about this, I think that if we don't trust our own instinct or our own analysis or our own, thoughts, then what do we have left? Because if we understand that
Well,
all knowledge that we have is sort of trapped inside of our own
the way I
subjective.
distinguish it is by saying, if you actually substantiate your opinion and do some thinking
Mhm.
about it and qualify it, then it becomes a position. And there's nothing
Oh,
wrong
okay.
with having a position. Like if you have a position, that means you can defend it. But
Hmm.
opinions are too loosey goosey. And I think, our opinions can easily change unless it becomes our, qualified position.
Yes, that's, I think, a very interesting one. I'd taken a bioethics class where the professor on the first day, looking through the syllabus, had said that in bioethics, of course, we have analysis, we draw on all kinds of philosophy and all sorts of analytic traditions, but you've got to leave space for what he called the ick, you know? And that sometimes you'll just look at a situation and you can't quite put your finger on why this rubs you the wrong way, but there's a gut feeling of ick. And then from there, you can judge, well, is this just because of some sort of cultural bias? Is this because of, this particular tradition telling me that this is wrong? Or is there some other level that's operating here that makes us feel from a sort of inherent human position that there's something unethical about this.
Okay.
Which I thought
All
was
right, let's move on to the next
Yeah.
one. This next insight, I call it no regrets. Now, listen, it's a little bit lengthier. Let's listen. Those who have no regrets because they're so pleased with how they turned out, I'm going to rain on your parade. Why is the person who you are today the perfect culmination of everything that has happened to you, every decision that you've made? It's pretending you're perfect, infallible. Now, I think anyone with an ounce of introspection will find plenty of fault with who they are today. And they can identify lots of places in their life where their life went off rails. And if they had made better choices, they wouldn't be in a feeble-minded delusion today where they believe they are perfect. Okay, maybe a little bit harsh. I don't know. Did I have somebody in mind? Well, I do remember when I was, Megan, I was teaching debating in prison at the Toronto South Detention Center. And I was actually in the solitary confinement, like under the prison. And one of my students was this guy with an orange jumpsuit. He had tattoos all over his face and his head. And this topic came up about regrets. And I remember he made this big old speech about how I have no regrets because if I regretted anything, then I wouldn't be the man who I am today. You know, this kind of like that cliche, what everybody says. And I remember looking at the guards saying,
I hope not.
Is it just me, or this guy is in the prison, under the prison, and he's talking about the man? In any case, so what do you think about regrets and having no regrets?
You know, even if I don't completely agree with that guy's position, I appreciate being able to look at your circumstances and say that, you know, I own this and I understand all of the things that got me to this position today, and I'm okay with myself now, which means that I have to learn to be okay with what I've done.
So it's
and
kind
I think
of like a form of like loving yourself or accepting yourself.
Yeah,
you can
I
appreciate
think
who you are
so.
today. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It just means that I accept. I've come to kind of to terms with myself. Is that what you
Yeah, I
mean?
guess it gets to the question of like, what does it mean really to regret something? Does it mean that you wish you hadn't done it? Does it mean that you're sorry for it, but you know that if you had no other choice, like, can you regret something
Do
where
you
you
think
didn't have a
it's in
choice?
our nature to regret? Do you think it's like a built-in mechanism that all humans have?
I think so. I think so. I mean, it's hard to make a big universal, everybody feels this for everybody doesn't kind of statement, but I think, you know, everybody must look back and say, well, I wish I'd done that a little bit
But if
differently.
that's true, Megan, isn't there a reason that we all have regret then? Isn't it then?
Mm.
Can we say there's no regrets if it's built into our DNA? I mean, isn't it some kind of safety mechanism or a check and balance that makes sure like if we regret something, that teaches us not to do that thing again, and somehow
Yeah,
it
to
helps
help
us
us be
survive or
better.
preserves us.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that by looking back, by having this ability to reflect, it helps us to look forward as well and say, well, I wouldn't have done that uh, in the past. Like, I wish I hadn't done that. So I know that I'm not going to do that in the future. So is
Right.
it possible to think about your future without thinking about your past? Maybe not.
How about in your young life? Any big regrets? You don't have to say them, but I'm wondering if you have any.
You know, not really. I can't say no regrets. I'm sure that there are little small things, but there's been no huge decision that I can think of where I'm like, "Ah, I wish I'd done that differently." Because I think by being happy where you are now, you have to recognize that all of those things were part of the path.
Yeah, and maybe also like all of life is a big learning curve, and we have to
Yeah.
go through the mistakes, and we have to, you know, facing your mistakes. I'm a big fan of that, of facing your challenges, and
Hmm.
because they're stepping stones to your goals. And so, you know, you can't regret having a falling down or having a mistake because
Hmm.
that mistake made you more resilient and able to face a worse problem later.
Yeah, and you got to be able to empathize with yourself in the past too, right? So you can look back at a decision and in hindsight, you know, hindsight 2020, you can say, oh, well, I shouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done that if I could do it again.
Yeah.
But we've got to trust that in those moments you were making the best decision that you could.
Yeah.
And if we believe that in those moments we had looked at our options and we had picked the one that we thought was best at the time, then, you know, how can you blame your past self for that?
Right. It's kind of like being your own best friend, which I love that idea as well.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Megan. Wonderful. We are disasters waiting to happen. I know it's a little bit of a gloomy topic, and the insight itself is a bit cynical. You will see in a second, you'll hear it in a second. But I chose this one specifically because I know you have a philosophical mind, and I thought it would be very interesting to have this conversation with you. So let's listen to my insight first, and then we'll talk about it. What are human beings? We all just desperately trying to survive. Every day facing countless obstacles and adversity, and also enduring countless assaults on our mental health, physical health. And so that's what we all share in common, is that we are kind of a petri dish, or just a cocktail of disasters waiting to happen. Did you get my point, or do I have to elaborate on that?
No, yeah, I get it. I don't know. I think it's a bit exaggerated. I don't think that, especially us, privileged people aren't really living, extreme life or death situation every single day. I mean, maybe if you look at Ukrainians right now, or the people in Yemen, I think it would be a different story. But I do agree that life is hard, and it's you have to face a lot of hardship in your life, whether it be physical or mental. But I don't necessarily think, I think we're moving up, because I think people live better lives today than they did like 100 years ago, or
well, that's certainly true physically. Like our longevity has increased and people are living longer, but we also have way more mental health crisis than we ever did before. At least it's recorded now. Maybe it was unrecorded before.
That's what I think. I think it's just we're developing a lot more like neuro studies, and we're understanding a lot more mental health. Before, you would just call kids like, they have a low attention span, they're very agitated, they get agitated quickly, they have anger issues, and now we link that to ADHD, or perhaps even on more serious cases like bipolar disorder or different types of mental.
But isn't it like, wasn't it Schopenhauer? I believe he was the German philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer, who said, life is a valley of tears, and the only way to escape from this harsh reality is through like escapisms, love, just distracting yourself from this fact. And so isn't any happiness that we eke out in life just sort of kind of a distraction from the fact that we're living in a hostile environment, the world, and everybody's out to get you, everybody's got their hand in your pocket. I mean, we're animals, and nature is hostile, and we're animals living in a natural world, and it's a hostile environment. Wouldn't you agree?
Not necessarily. I don't think people are out to get you. Like, I think you might have some bitter people in the world, but when you go out, you're not out there trying to ruin everybody's day for your benefit, unless you're like a really evil person. I think most of the time you want everyone to, you want people's best interests in your heart, and I don't think that speaks true for everybody.
Is it? This brings me back to the conversation I had with your mom and my wife, the beautiful Shelley. We were talking about, she thinks that there are some evil people out there, as you said, that are among us, and we have to be careful. And our job in life is to kind of tread carefully and avoid those people. And if we can, we'll have a good, happy life. But I said, no, I don't think that's the case. And I think we're all capable of being evil people. And all it takes is kind of the wrong day and the right situation, and it'll come out of us. And so our challenge is not to avoid the bad people, but the challenge is not to trigger any person from bringing that out of them. And so, I mean, isn't life more precarious than what you're making it seem like?
Yeah, but then you would describe sort of like animalistic like we have a lot of human, like animal nature, and that we, no matter what, even if we try to be elegant, we try to be royal, at one point we're animals, and we'll just eventually, it's possible at least, to go back to those roots.
I agree, man. We can suppress our
I think that
animalistic nature, but it can also be activated.
but I think
And
that opens
so
up a can of worms then, because then that would excuse people from like beating their wives and people being very misogynistic, and I don't think that's excusable because of oh, we're
but you know how
animals.
like people like in the schoolyard with young kids, you respect kids who are kind of confident in themselves and they have a high opinion of themselves, so you respect them. But if someone comes along in the schoolyard that's insecure and doesn't really respect themselves, that person is likely to trigger that sort of that dark side in other people, and then they'll make themselves vulnerable to them. And so aren't we just constantly in a struggle? Like, what happens if we're down and depressed, and now we're going around triggering everybody to dump on us? Isn't that sort of create an avalanche of negative events?
It could. I mean, I think people too are, like you said, like they use escapism to sort of avoid that. Like people play video games, people do, drink alcohol and things like that to avoid that, which I think is healthy to a certain point. It shouldn't be used excessively, but if you're playing video games once a night to sort of escape the fact that you have work tomorrow just for an hour, I think it's healthy, and I think it's good to sort of take your mind off things once in a while.
Well, I'm glad to hear your youthful perspective on this, because maybe my view is too cynical. And I remember one time I was working at Pickering College, and there was another teacher, and I was all happy-go-lucky, and the teacher said to me, I think I've been kicked around a little bit more than you, and so I've become more cynical in my worldview. And I think maybe I'm there now, that life has kicked me around a bit, and you're optimistic and idealistic, and maybe we can meet in the middle, or I can learn from you. All right, moving right along.
Let's listen to this insight and then talk about it on the other side.
At the heart of judging people is one's unwillingness to expand their own horizons and their inability to imagine that others might have different limits.
So judging people, this was something I grappled with when I was your age. It's like, how do you not judge people? How is it that some people are non-judgmental, like Buddhists? I know a few Buddhist monks, and that's one of the key features of Buddhism, is that you don't judge, or you work hard to stop judging. Now, what do you think about judging people in general? Is this something that we should aspire to not do? Is this something that brings us down when we do it? What do you think?
I think so, and I think there's a distinction to be made between judging people on a personal level. This person is selfish. This person is a bad person. This person's a good person. This person doesn't work hard enough. Blah blah blah, and judging people on a legal level. Because I think this person crashed into my car. No, I think they crashed into my car.
Let's get to that in a second. We're just talking about on a personal level right now, right?
Yeah.
Some people say that all judgments are auto-referential. So when you judge somebody, you're kind of recognizing in somebody else the thing that you're also guilty of, but you deny it about yourself, and you're hyper aware about it in the other person. So you can recognize the thing that you hate about yourself.
And it's interesting.
Go ahead.
It's interesting that you say, you talk about your Buddhist friends who aspire not to judge people. I mean, the point that you just made about judgment being self-referential, I mean, that's also in the Bible as well. I think you're right. I think we shouldn't judge people.
So then how do you square that with the job of being a judge in the legal system that you're entering? How is it that a man or a woman can stand there and render their judgment on somebody whose life hangs in the balance?
Well, because I think it's a different kind of judging. I think there's judging someone on a personal level. You're a good person, you're a bad person. And there's judging, did this person violate a law? Because that's objective. There is a law. Let's listen to the facts, let's find out. And if they did violate the law, then the law says what we do to them. You're just following what, as a society, we have through elected officials decided are the laws of the land that people have to follow. And so I think it's a different kind of judgment. And I think that they're not
But
They're not the same.
these elected or appointed officials that are supposed to judge us in the legal terms, aren't they also swayed by their own human nature and their own biases? Like, don't they see themselves in the person on the stand? You know, aren't they going to? Do you see what I mean? Aren't they also vulnerable to the same things we all are?
I'm sure they are to an extent, but I think we have a system that works. We need a system. We can't just. I don't think we can live in a society where there just are no judges. Help! I've been attacked. Oh, well, we don't want to judge the person who attacked you because, you know, we might have biases against them. I don't think that's not a system that could work. That would be anarchy. That would be chaos.
Isn't it more fair than to have kind of a jury system rather than a single judge judging you? Because at least with a jury, you're kind of weighing 12 people's, I guess, opinions versus just one.
I think there's a lot of sense in that. We do have juries in this country, not as much as in the United States, but we do have them. And I think there's a lot of that's kind of the point of the idea, the motivating principle behind having juries is that you get more of a community judgment. You're being judged by your peers in the community rather than by the judge from on high as part of the government. So
how about you yourself, Sterling? Do you find that you do find yourself judging people from time to time? Do you catch yourself doing it?
I do, yes, and I try not to. It is hard though. It is hard. I think it does come up naturally, but I think it's something that is good to strive not to do and to try and catch yourself
since we do it so readily and easily, but we all agree that we shouldn't do it. Does this mean it's part of our nature that we're kind of struggling against, or why do we descend to a state that kind of against our better judgment? No pun intended.
That's a difficult question. Why does anyone do anything that they know that they shouldn't do? I guess it is a part of it's a natural inclination that we have to take control over. And that we have to maybe that's part of what it is maybe that's what differentiates us as humans from animals is that we have natural impulses, but we can control them and we can tame them if we put enough effort into them. I mean, I imagine that the frogs, you know, if they judge the other frogs, I don't think that they have the idea that it's not good to judge people and they work on improving themselves. No, I think they just have impulse and they have instinct. But we humans have more than that. And I think we have to take advantage of that.
Use our faculties. Okay, next insight is on magic. One time I was out in the park next to my house and my neighbor decided to take it upon himself to tell my kid about, I don't know what he said exactly, but he said, don't believe that, and gobbledygook, magic. Well, he decided to burst my child's bubble, my young child, telling them magic is not real. I don't know what he was talking about. It was kind of something like along the lines of Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. And I thought to myself, that's not right. You know, because I think as a parent, I want my child to believe in magical things as long as possible. And the reason is because I think if you believe that something is possible, and even when everyone else doesn't, then later on in your life, you know, you're going to be the person who, how do I say this, that can then push the envelope or become innovative and believe that you can do something when against all the odds. And I think that's how we kind of we push forward in this world, and that's that, you know, it's one of the features of being a person. But if we become cynical and close our minds to magical things, then it kind of just narrows down our options of what we can do later on as grown-ups. What do you think about that?
You know, it's really interesting that you. This is something about me. I don't actually think that you know, Coach Tamer, is that I, as a little side hobby, am an amateur magician.
No,
I'm not sure if you knew this.
I didn't know that.
And I don't know if this is going to come through in the camera, but I actually thought I could show a little for anyone watching this on YouTube or whatever after.
All right, let's do it.
I've set up we have here the King of Clubs, but if we just rotate it around, we could turn it into into the King of Hearts.
Awesome.
Um,
Wow.
So, I do think I like magic. Magic's fun, and I think that it's just that feeling of not knowing how something's done and thinking that something's impossible, but you just saw it, so it has to be possible. It has to be doable. You just can't figure out how it's done. I think that is important, and that wonder is useful, and it does push us to do more and to think, well, if that is possible, but it seems impossible, what else seems impossible but is actually possible if you spend enough time thinking about it? I think it's Carl Sagan who once said that sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, which is sort of, I think, the same principle that if you work hard enough and if you advance the technology and if you build a thing, the machine that can do, eventually you can achieve things that seem like they were magic.
Stuff like the Santa Claus. You know, is it important for kids to believe in Santa Claus? I say yes, because
I'm not sure about that.
Well, do we want kids to think that it's possible that a man is coming through our chimney into our house every Christmas to leave things in our living room? I think perpetuating kind of the myth or the magic of Santa Claus, what I explain to kids, because sometimes in my young kids' classes, certain kids take it upon themselves to kind of dispel the myth of Santa Claus for the other kids. And then the other kids have a look of distress in their eyes, and I have to deal with it. And I always say, look, Santa Claus is real for those who choose to believe. And that's kind of like magic. It's like, if you believe in magic, then magic is real. It's one of those subjective reality things. But between you and I, as adults, I say, Santa Claus, the myth, the man coming through the chimney, this magical story is just a symbol or a representation of something that's actually magical. Christmas, the feeling of Christmas, the time of the year when people become generous of spirit and become the better version of themselves, and something really magical takes place. But how do you explain something abstract like that to a child? So you simplify it by personifying, creating the character of Santa Claus. So I think Santa does represent.
It sounds like the life of Pi.
What do you mean?
The idea that you tell the better story you tell the more interesting story to tell the same ultimate message than telling what actually happened. Although that's a little less positive than Christmas in the context of that story. Are you familiar with the life of Pi, Coach Tamer, former English teacher, surely? Okay.
I read it and I watched it. Yeah.
So I think I guess that's the negative side.
Every human being has to face adversity. We all have problems and challenges and hardships, and that doesn't make us unique from each other. But what makes us different from each other is how we face our adversity. And so some people have, they do what I call the ostrich in the sand technique, which as soon as there's a problem, they bury their head and duck and dodge and figure out a way to avoid it. Other people, they look at the adversity and they say, I'm going to tackle the problem immediately. Whatever comes my way, I'm going to bring it down. Other people say, I'm going to tackle the problem, but tomorrow. Right now, I'm just going to finish my lunch, take it easy, binge watch some TV, and tomorrow, I'm going to tackle that problem. Other people look at their adversity and they say, I'm out of here. They run the other way. Why are people so sometimes, I guess, intent on avoiding their adversity in life? Doesn't it? Do people sometimes, when they don't face their adversity and when they don't face the truth of what's happening, the problem that's happening in their life, are they somehow fooling themselves, shortchanging themselves? Do they lack the spiritual fortuity or strength to engage or overcome the problem? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there are a million answers to why people avoid, acting on something that needs to be acted on. I don't know. Those answers are as varied as there are people, and probably more, because each, there may be a problem in a marriage that one person has, and then it's, that's different than how they would handle a financial problem. So I don't think there's any answer to that. Would it be advantageous? Yes. Action conquers fear, as they say. So it's beneficial to do it, and to do it quickly, and comfortably quickly. I mean, but are there any answers about it? No, that's absolutely unique.
I want to ask you, as my spiritual mentor, that I've noticed about certain people. Why are some people, when they do wrong, when they clearly have wronged somebody, why are some people so intent on doubling down on this action as opposed to owning it, as opposed to confronting it and apologizing? Why are people so unable to accept that they did something wrong and own it? And instead, they go double down on it, triple down, and make it worse and worse.
It's hard to say without specific examples, but I would say most people think that they're good people and they don't want to admit that they've done something bad. So I think, it goes against their personal narrative. And the quicker that they forget it, the quicker
they think that they can never do any wrong. Don't we all recognize that we're fallible people? Like that nobody is only good and only right all the time?
Yes. I think people know that they're fallible. They don't. No one likes it. No one likes to see themselves, doing something less than their own expectation. But I think in some situations, I think this is kind of where you're going, is that when you do something wrong, the quicker you move on from it and just try to forget it, the better for them personally, right? Whereas confronting it, apologizing, saying, I screwed up here, I think that would be better for everybody and for the individual as well. But I think that's just a very difficult process to do for your ego.
It reminds me of something your mom told me a long time ago, and I was struggling because I was no details, but I was having a hard time with somebody, and they clearly were in the wrong. And your mom said I should rise above it. I should apologize. I should forgive. And I said to her, why me? I'm not the one who's wrong here. Why should I rise above it? Why can't the other person rise above it? Why does it always have to be me?
I've heard this with you so many times. I've heard this with you many times. And what have I always told you? It's the Spider-Man thing. It's that with great power comes great responsibility. And Tamer, you have always been someone who has been aware of the situation without going into specifics. I've heard these things before. And I say, you are the one that is conscious, cognizant of what's going on. So therefore, it's up to you to make that change, because you can't expect that of someone else who is kind of mired in their own circumstances. I think you have been a little more aware of the macro, and when someone is focused on the micro, I think it's much harder for them, and it's
right.
So it's incumbent on you. If you want to change the situation, it's up to you, because you are aware of the situation.
Like, be the change you want to see. But that's what your mom, another thing your mom said was, don't begrudge it, because you're blessed to be able to rise above it. Not everybody is able to do that. You're blessed to be able to see the big picture. You're blessed to be able to offer forgiveness. And so don't begrudge forgiving somebody. Don't begrudge rising above something, because you're blessed to have the ability to do it.
Yeah. The other part of it is also, would you rather be right, or would you rather be in love? Right. So, and when I say in love, I mean in love, in a loving situation, in a balanced, situation with whoever this person is, because you can go, I'm right. And then there, whatever, your friendship is over, or you've destroyed a business relationship. Is that beneficial? Not necessarily. You want to compromise. You want to recognize what the other person's going through if you can. If they don't do it, it depends on what you want out of the relationship. You can choose to end it, but I find compromise is usually a better way to go, I think.
All right. Next up, peaks and valleys. So I think a life is a series of peaks and valleys. We're up and we're down. And I think a lot of people, they freak out when they hit their valley. And a lot of people think that when they're in their valley, that's kind of who they are, and that's their identity. But I think what you need to remember when you're down is the only thing you should be doing when you're down is trying to get back up. When you're down is not the time to try to and progress your life and make decisions. And you certainly should not be making life-altering decisions like leaving your spouse or quitting your job or heaven forbid, ending your life. The only thing you should be focused on when you're in your valley is getting back to the peak. And when you're at that peak, that's not the time to sit on the couch and binge watch television. That's the time to move your life forward, make those great choices and decisions, and kind of activate your life. What do you think?
No, well, not necessarily. I think, again, it's an individual thing. There's an author that I like named Haruki Murakami, and in a couple of his books, at least, he's a bit of a strange writer, and there's times where characters end up in a pit, let's say, just a pit that's kind of, he'd never seen it in his neighborhood before, but for some reason something is calling him to go into that pit, and you just stay in the pit, and that's your valley. And sometimes you just need to sit there, and there's no apparent benefit of it, but it's just to be in the darkness for a while and maybe get comfortable with it, and then you reemerge. And I know for me, with my valleys have generally been health related. So those valleys for me have always been a time of introspection, not necessarily action, but reevaluating things, and then going, oh yeah, I need to be more grateful. I need to be more, connected. I need to be less self-centered at those times. And those are the times of my greatest, growth as a person, I think, in any kind of a challenge. And because those are when we learn about ourselves, really, right? I don't want to just know you at your peak, right? I want to see who you are when you're
Although
down.
they do say that nobody wants you when you're down. I find that to be true, and I find that people enjoy your company. They want to be around you. They're full of support when you're at your peak.
But
as
that's
soon
the
as you hit your
challenge.
valley, you learn who your friends are when you're in your valley, because they all of a sudden they scatter like cockroaches.
But can you be magnetic when you're in your valley? Right? Can you be that person when you're in your valley? Yeah, you can. Right? That's what I'm saying, is you can, because when you're at your peak, you're like, oh, everything is great and you're joyful and all of that. But can you still maintain that in your valley? Can you be a person who is selfless and thoughtful and considerate and compassionate? That's the challenge. So it's not that it's not, as always, it's not an all or nothing thing, but I think that's the challenge. It's more challenging to do it in your valley, but I think that's what we should be striving to do.
You mean me personally? Why are you looking at me?
Yeah, you personally.
You
you should always strive to be less.
In your life, if you believe this theory that's like we're all going up and down, are you up, down, on the way up, or on the way down?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Hard to say. There's definitely some challenges going on right now. And so, but personally, I think I'm handling them okay right now, all in all. And that's definitely not just because of me, because I've got amazing people in my life. So I would say externally things are challenging. Internally, I mean, can be tough, but I think I'm handling it okay personally. Okay. But I was also listening to something else recently that they were saying how there's basically we go through life-changing events about every 5 years or so, 7 years maybe. So you kind of go, oh, okay, this is one of those, you recognize where you are at, and then you go, okay, this is how I'm going to have to deal with this for a little while. And then, after that, we'll see what happens. Then there's going to be maybe a plateau or another peak. So it's coming.
Well, I got to say, before we move on from this segment, I really am a huge admirer of your life skills, and because you have something so special and that I know I lack, or I don't have it as refined as you. But that's why I consider you my spiritual mentor. I mean, you keep me grounded, you keep me sane, you keep me everything in perspective, and so I really appreciate our friendship over the years, because you've given me so much to work on, to think about, and to help improve me as a man.
You're bringing me to tears, Tamer.
Oh,
no, you really are. Thank you. I've been really fortunate in my life that my relationships, all my relationships, my family, my friends, and my wife, they've all been fantastic. My challenges have been generally personal, like with my own physical health. So I can't take a lot of credit for it. You know, like my brother is just this incredible human being, and most firstborns get jealous of their baby kid, the baby sibling. It's, you know, like I've just been really fortunate. And, you know, regarding you specifically, you've just been a friend that, because I've pulled back a lot with things going on lately, and you've always maintained contact. And so I really appreciate it. I don't know what to say, but thank you.
Wakanda forever. Okay, let's move on. Being humble, being down to earth. In order to forgive people, you have to recognize your own fallibility. And in order to recognize that you're not perfect and you can be wrong, right, which is required to forgive other people for their faults, then you have to be humble. And, you know, I admire Asian people, believe it or not. That's why I chose this image. But in the Asian culture, it doesn't matter whether you're in Korea, China, Philippines, Japan, it seems to me that the Asian people put a premium on modesty and humility and make sure that their kids are raised with this value. And so that's why it's so easy to talk to Asian people, and it's so easy to I guess do conflict resolution, in my experience. What do you think? Because we were not necessarily raised in the same vein, with humility being a premium.
No, that's true. Humility, I don't know, Tamer. I'm thinking now of a story about our father, weirdly enough. And even though, you know, a lot of his character wasn't at all about humility, when we traveled to Mexico, he in a car, and we were late teens, you and I, and he made sure to have all these packages of our old, you know, clothes and you know, Tupperware and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I remember he dropped off this sewing machine at this little hut in the middle of the night, and only a goat really saw what he did. And I remember thinking that that was quite like a humble thing to do, actually, you know.
I remember when we finally gave that sewing machine away, it was in the middle of the night and somebody was sleeping on the curb outside, and our dad, Gabber, right, set that sewing machine on the ground. He did it in the most selfless way, not flashy, not looking for any recognition, left it beside this person. We were watching it from the car, and that, I think, was a pivotal moment in our lives.
Thinking about humility is a really, really good exercise, no matter what, you know, just thinking about it, you know, thinking about instances of it, memories, whether good or bad, all awareness or consciousness geared towards not self-destruction, but self-liberation is a good thing. And I think thinking about humility is already a good thing, no matter if you're working through stuff like some people are or not.
But why are some people so intent at seeing themselves as like the standard bearer for all the rest of the humans? Why do people give themselves so much credit? And, you know, I don't understand how people can be floating above other people. And sometimes you see the most ordinary, mundane, pedestrian person who's got an ego the size of an elephant. And I also know that the world kind of treats you according to how you see yourself.
Yeah, it is unfair. What are you going to do? Like, the nature of human behavior is absolutely ridiculous,
Yeah,
you know, and it comes back to, and the capacity, you know, for self-destruction is limitless as a species, if you will. Yeah, mankind, humankind. But
well, yeah, our species is rife with paradoxes. Nothing makes sense. Everything is the opposite is true. It makes me think of the most the intelligent people are often wrought with insecurity because they're intelligent. They're thinking about all the possibilities and the outcomes and where they fit in. But the really ignorant people are often full of self-confidence. First of all, we have to distinguish that there's a subjective reality versus an objective reality. And subjective reality is very interesting because it depends on your belief. I think it was Henry Ford from the Motor Company. He said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. And so how can two opposite things be true? Well, because belief equals reality. But that's a subjective reality. It's like a self-fulfilling premonition. And so if you believe I'm your leader, I'm your leader. But if you believe I'm not your leader, I'm not your leader. That's a subjective reality thing. But there's objective reality. So if I believe the poisonous mushroom is not poisonous, if you eat the mushroom, the reality, the brute force of that reality will then come crashing down on you.
Okay, what's the question? Reality?
Well, let's talk about virtual reality.
Okay.
Because have you tried one of these VR headsets?
Yeah, I have. I enjoyed it immensely. I really did. Although it did mess with my mind a lot.
Well, okay, that's what I'm getting at. Because really, when you put those things on, people think it's a game, but it messes with your mind because basically it plays with lights. It changes the lights, and all the different light configurations creates a new world, a new reality. And it's not just a reality that's like in and of itself separate from you, because you can engage with other people in this world. If you have no legs and you can't walk, now all of a sudden in this world you can walk. And you can walk beside somebody that you admire and you love, and you can go for a tea and walk down the streets of the town where you came from. And it creates, like, again, a subjective reality that you can believe, and you can make friends in this world. So I'm just wondering, are we that malleable? Are we that suggestible to think that if we just alter lights and all of a sudden our whole world will change and our whole attitudes will change and everything that's real will change?
I don't know. I think it's going to be, I hope that some social psychologists are really planning a very long-term study. And by long-term, I mean the span of their lifetimes and beyond, to see how artificial intelligence and virtual reality affects social psychology over the span of generations. Because our generation, me and you, Tamer, we knew life before the internet, before virtual reality, before, Chat GPT or whatever that's called now. That's, like fake text that can be created by artificial intelligence. So the way that it affects us as far as being malleable or not is different than Elena and Gabriel's generation, who have come up since they were born with these devices and with this input into their brain.
One of the worlds that I loved going to, and especially during the time when our father passed away, and it really helped me deal with grieving, was a place called Saying Goodbye. And it was a place that was hosted by like a 72-year-old guy named Tom. And you would go there and there would be 17, 20 people respectfully listening to each other, supporting each other, letting you talk, tell your story. And I'm telling you, it made a huge difference in my life. And this was a place inside my headset in this virtual reality world that was so real, so important, so effective. And I just thought to myself, I don't think I can even think of a place in the real physical world that would have done such a good service for me.
It's a beautiful idea, really. However, since we're talking about virtual reality, I'm going to bring in reality to the situation, and that is the smells are missing. The way that the sun feels on your skin and the way that the air is in the market streets of, Manila in the Philippines, that's not there. The person, shouting out 4 blocks over, but you hear at the very, very slightest, all those cityscapes that we have audibly and in all of our sensory, parts of our bodies, it's not satisfied in virtual reality. And because it's not, and because people of older generations especially have experienced those things, that might lead to an even greater loneliness, a greater sense of being isolated.
So I think when people think of you as nice, they're really acknowledging that you observe social etiquette, norms of society. And so when people are with you, they can expect you to respond in a nice, positive, agreeable, generous way. And so that's appreciated, and that's considered nice. So not nice is when people don't conform to the social norms, and then they make you feel uncomfortable. That's not appreciated, and that's not nice. Do you agree with that definition of nice people?
Yes.
All right. Do you surround yourself with nice people? Do you consider yourself a nice person?
I'm not natural. I was not raised to be a nice person. Perhaps the opposite. No, I wasn't raised to be a bad person, but I did not have the greatest influences in my immediate family. So it's something, being nice is something that I am still learning and that I am trying to apply to myself.
You know, with you, I speak out of love and respect, and you're like, you're one of my true friends. Like, I can count on two hands how many true friends I have. With you, it seems like it's Groundhog Day sometimes. Like, it's like any goodwill that I have built up from our last meeting, we have to start from scratch the next meeting. It seems like we're strangers when we first talk, and then after about 2 or 3 minutes, we're back to that good old friendship. But there's always that. Do you know what I mean? Is that something you're aware of?
Oh yes, but it takes two to tango, and I think you may want to ask yourself, like, why, if there's something perhaps that you're bringing to the table that needs to be addressed with every meeting, and then smoothed and then sanded down.
Are you saying I'm demanding and I'm needed? I'm always coming at you with some problems and issues.
I didn't say that.
I don't know what you mean by that. You have to ask your team. I have to, or we all have to?
We all have to.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And I consider you to be perfectly like a perfect gentleman and a great conversationalist. And actually, let's go back to this photo. Going to your place and hanging out with you and Rock and the gang, the super friends, it's just really, you guys are among the nicest people that I know and the nicest friends. And you guys are so generous and so gracious. And I want to say, you are a gift-loving person, and you love giving gifts and being generous, and you love receiving gifts. And we have that kind of relationship that I'll never come to your house empty-handed. And when I come to your house, I can expect this kind of treatment, like what you see here. And that's just like, and so you guys do conform to my definition of nice. That's you behave in a way that I would expect nice people to behave. So I feel very comfortable, and I don't have to be guarded. And you guys you do what you're supposed to do. You say what you're supposed to say. Other than that little groundhog thing. I know I have my foibles. I'm not picking on you. But anyway, how do you deal with people who are not nice when they come up into your stratosphere and under your radar?
Unfortunately, when I encounter non-nice people who are in my space, unfortunately, that makes me not nice as well. At least my impulses and how I would react, the things that I think definitely are kind of negative. I think it's always, sort of floating under the surface, the angry Jason.
Well, I think that's kind of like street smarts, because they teach you, like, if you learned your etiquette from the books, so to speak, they would say, turn the other cheek, always put, be the bigger person. But sometimes not nice people, they mistake your kindness as weakness. And the only language they understand is the fury. And so sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. And I think, that's how you address not nice people, right? You come back at them in kind.
Yes, I'm not a turn the other cheek person at all. I think also turning the other cheek empowers not nice people to continue to be not nice. And
you would have to be self-aware to actually kind of take pause and reflect on what's happening and change midway. But most people who are not nice are not introspective and self-aware. So you're not going to be reforming them during a conversation, right?
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. And the older people are, the more stubborn they seem to be, in terms of clinging to, sort of negative, antisocial, not nice behavior.
So do you think it's true that as we age, we get grumpier and more cantankerous? or can we combat this, or is this just gonna happen? Because I feel it happening to me. I feel a little bit. Thank God I work with children, because the children kind of keep me a little bit youthful, and I know the same is true for you. But I see people around me getting grumpier and grumpier as they get older.
Well, the reason for that is because they're not happy, secretly or overtly. And if you can't get your ducks in a row by a certain age, or at least, have the mental capacity to accept things and fix other things, if you are unhappy and you can't change your attitude, then of course you're going to be stuck in the attitude and get grumpier and grumpier. It's true, and I do see that happen with people, but I think fundamentally it is because their life circumstances have made them unhappy.
On a kind of philosophical level, having money doesn't make us better. It doesn't make us worse. We all know that. I think everyone can agree that just because someone has more money doesn't mean they're a better person. But having more money enables so many things in your life that you get to feeling better. And and when you have less money or no money, you feel like a lesser person. And so even though it's not true, it feels that way. And the way you feel kind of gives permission to other people how to feel about you. So it's kind of this sort of, you're sending out signals into the world, and people are reacting to those signals in a way that makes this illusion seem true.
Interesting. I'm not totally sure about you, but I grew up poor, and our family was poor, which is to say we had no money. And I did not actually realize we were poor until I went to high school, and finally sort of noticed that. I guess it was more obvious than that other students, other kids came from families that were, better off, and not necessarily hugely better off. I mean, I'm not talking about the kids who got Corvettes for their sweet 16 birthday. I'm just talking about the kids who could afford like new clothes, lunch in the cafeteria. And so when growing up poor, the impetus was to make money. So when I was a kid, my little brother and I did a few things to make money. Like we made lottery tickets and sold them to the other students. And
Nice.
we
Very
did
sophisticated.
we did goldfish. I had found this Chinese supplier who supplied feeder goldfish for, feeding your bigger fish. And so we did all the packaging.
To me, that sounds like an entrepreneurial endeavor. And so growing up poor, did that foster the entrepreneurial spirit that you still have today?
Yeah, it was necessary. If I wanted something, I had to earn the money, to buy it. I bought my first computer working in school as a lab assistant after school. So I bought my own computer with my own cash. I was very proud I'm still very proud of that. I sold for a couple of Christmases, I sold greeting cards and gifty gift kind of things. I had gotten a chemistry set for Christmas once, and I learned to make fireworks, like firecrackers. And so my brother and I also packaged and sold fireworks.
I remember there was these guys in grade 6. We used to go to the edge of the schoolyard during recess, and they would be showing people their booklet. They had made a catalog of all the Sears models in the underwear section of the Sears catalog. They put them all in one little booklet, and to look at their booklet, you had to pay a quarter, and there were kids lined up around the corner. And I thought, wow, God, I wonder what they're doing nowadays, these guys. In any
Multi-millionaires.
Case, probably. But like I said to the kids, parents, they seem to think that money is synonymous with happiness, and so that as long as you're pursuing your grades, the right school, as long as you're doing something that's going to facilitate a great career and a great salary, you're going to be happy. But I say to the kids always say, no, we know we're already happy. We don't need to wait 10 years and do all that stuff to be happy. We're happy now. And so I always say that the parents know something about money that the kids don't know. And that is, when you have financial stress in your life or problems, that kind of overshadows all the rest of your problems. Everything has to go on a back burner. But when you have money in your life, if you have a strong financial engine, now you can actually get around to your other problems. You can actually think about your relationship problem, take a vacation. Or you can think about your emotional problem and hire a psychiatrist. You know what I mean? So it's like money problems, money isn't everything, but having money problems kind of overshadows everything else. Would you agree with that?
100%. Because, and you know, your experiences with students, youth, the parents are sending their kids to you. So the parents have an interest in the kids. I mean, obviously that seems obvious, but that wasn't true for me. And that's not true for a lot of kids. Like, in terms of my parents, both of whom were alive, my parents had no interest, had nothing to say about me going to school, post high school. They had no encouragement. They had no guidance. They had not a single thought about mine or my siblings' education or what was going to happen to us. So, you know, and I like to, I have to think of it as children raising themselves. And I would have to say that that's what me and my siblings were, children raising themselves. And children cannot raise themselves, but some are forced to. And education may not be a priority for children who are trying to raise themselves. So there's kind of this ivory tower kind of idea where, you know, you're just used to kids whose parents actually care. I mean, maybe they don't even necessarily have to like their kids, but they're doing the right steps, or at least
they have a sense of duty for them.
Yeah. So you're talking to somebody who has no experience with that, you know, like, and there's,
but let me tell you, as far as someone who had to pull up their own bootstraps and do a lot of things that the parents should have been doing, you really did a great job. So hubris is it's that kind of, that bad kind of pride. We think about pride as a good thing, right? I'm proud of my kids. I'm proud of myself for my accomplishment. That's the good stuff. That's okay to be prideful or proud, but excessive pride, unwarranted pride, undeserving pride, that's called hubris. And that's one of the things that young people suffer from. It's kind of, young people have a proclivity for hubris. And so I always tell my students, there's two things, like two marks going against young people right from the get-go. They suffer from ignorance, which is not their fault, right? They just are not aware. They haven't learned enough to kind of put all the pieces together. But then they suffer from hubris. This kind of, you know, young people, they don't know what they don't know. There's an expression that says, you know, the smarter I get, or the more I know, the less I know. So how can that be? The more I know, the less I know. Oh, it's because the more I learn, the more I realize how little I actually know in the grand scheme of things, of what there is to know. And so when you have hubris, it's that classic kid who doesn't realize how little they know, and they think they know it all, and they don't need the advice from anybody. In fact, they're surprised, why aren't people coming to me for advice since I know it all? So what do you think about hubris? And, you know, I say it's kind of, young people have a penchant for it, but some older people don't outgrow it. Some older people suffer from it. So what do you think about this?
I think it definitely makes sense that young people are more prone to have hubris, but I don't know if being ignorant translates to hubris. You might know that you're probably not the best, but you still want to come off that way. I don't know if that would be considered like true hubris, if you just want to appear like you know everything. whereas you like internally you know that you're not that great. Would you think that's true hubris, or do you think, you know, externally expressing yourself this way wouldn't count?
So you're saying hubris is a special category of like egomaniacs, like, or people that may be suffering from a personality disorder? No, I think it's more of a garden variety. I think that hubris is simply kind of overstating your own value and underestimating everybody else's value.
I think to an extent, everyone's essentially the main character of their own story. And because you spend so much time with yourself, you're like literally the main character. And I think it's hard not to be so obsessed with yourself, and it's hard not to like see yourself as, you know, you feel like you're trying your best. You feel like everything you're doing is essentially what you think to be right. And if this is what you think to be right, then you would probably want other people to agree with what you think to be right, right? But also going back to what you said about, you know, young people feeling like they know everything and they don't really want to listen to other people. I think to an extent, I definitely see that to be true. Like sometimes my parents tell me to do things and I really don't get it. I don't understand why they want me to do these things. Um, but I feel like as I even like now, as I've gotten a little bit older, I reflect on the things that they told me to do when I was younger, and I see that there is actually truth in that. And I really do think that as I grow older, I'll probably see, you know, probably instances of hubris in my own life, like as I am right now.
Well, they say that every like teenager goes through their period of narcissism. And so like every human being has a narcissistic episode in their life. And most people learn through life experience that this is not a rewarding way of being in the world. However, some adults, they run with it. And then you see these adult narcissists that have this kind of hubris as well. But I think probably if you did a psychological study, you would find that narcissism and hubris probably goes hand in hand. I don't know. These are just my roughshod observations. All right, next, insight, boundaries. I selected this one especially for you because you pushed a lot of boundaries just to be here today. You really did. Like, who would have thought that, you know, you would go from being the shyest kid that I've ever met to being the representative of all the kids in the debating program, right? You pushed a lot of boundaries to get here. But part of, you know, you said debating helped you find your voice and helped you kind of come out of your shell and find yourself. But debating itself, the way I teach it anyway, is about pushing boundaries of thinking. And that's what I call insight development. And you know, there's a big emphasis of that when we learn debating. Insights, finding insights in your mind, it's like pushing the boundaries of thought, not settling for that first thought that comes to mind. So when everybody looks at something straight, they see the same thing. But debaters learn to look at things from different angles, and then suddenly we see something different that the other person didn't see. So just in that act alone, we're pushing a boundary of thought. And so, but how do we think an original thought? How do we think of something that nobody has ever thought before? And my theory is, if you can create something from nothing, an insight, and then take that insight and use it as a foundation for your next insight, and create an insight about the first insight, and then an insight about that next one, I think then by the time you do that 3 or 4 times, you're going to be in kind of uncharted waters. You're going to be thinking things that nobody's thought before and coming up with ideas. And do you think that's how it works?
I think the premise of that definitely allows for really, really good insights, but the fact or like the pursuit to think something that nobody has ever thought before, I don't know if that's possible. Because I don't know. I feel like there's been so many people, so many great intelligent minds who have thought so many things that I feel like it's probably impossible to,
But
you
have
know,
they
do
thought, I
something.
mean, of course, the topics are narrow or limited, but the way you think about it versus the way I think about it can be so different. The question you asked yourself, which prompted a certain spark that you got, can be slightly different, which leads to a different angle, a different insight. So there's so many little variables and little nuance that can take place that even if someone is kind of more or less thinking along the same train, you guys can be very, very different in your approach. I see it all the time when I ask the same questions and ask students to deliver yes speeches off the same topic. I usually get a very, very different speech.
Yeah, I think like if you put it like that, I think definitely because, you know, the way we think probably comes a lot or like what we think of when we think of certain things definitely comes from like our personal experiences and the things that we know, and it's impossible to know exactly what everyone else knows. Like even if you feed two people the exact same knowledge, make them read the same books, go through the same classes, I think they'll still have original thoughts. So I don't think it's possible for two people to have exactly the same like the exact same brain. So I think if that's true, then probably every thought we ever think is probably original then. Wouldn't that be true?
I want to ask you something. Do you think it's in our nature? Do you think every person is trying to push the boundaries like that? That's what being a human is all about, is striving to push further, to go further, to see what we're all about? Or is it just certain people that do that, and certain people that want to do that?
I feel like it's certain people probably, because I feel like the vast majority of people want to fit in and want to like go with the crowd and just create a happy life for themselves and not necessarily push these boundaries, as you say. I think not everyone is probably capable of that. Not everyone has the courage to do that, I think.
So it requires courage to push boundaries. Like I keep thinking about, look, this ice climber here in the picture. And I watched a documentary about a free climber. They climb without any ropes, and they're climbing the craziest mountains without any, it's just one wrong move and you're done, right? And have you ever seen those guys free climbing?
I think I know what you mean, yeah.
The one is called, his name is Hannand. I forget, his Alex Hannand or something like that. In any case, he said his body, when he's up there in some crevice and against a mountain, and there's nowhere to go but up. Like he can't give up, he can't change his mind, he has to complete his mission or he's dead. If it starts raining, he's got to deal with it. If he's got a cramp, he's got to deal with it. If he drops his chalk, he's got to deal with it. He's in the middle of a mountain and there's nowhere but survival. And so how does it, he says, he's scared, of course, but he has to suppress his fear in order to do that. And so his body is screaming, stop doing this. This is so unnatural. I don't want to be here on the side of a mountain. I could fall at any moment, but he has to suppress that fear at every moment and maintain control and composure, because if he allowed the fear to come through, he would then seize up physically and fall. So it's such a mental game. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think just this seems like a really extreme case, but I really feel like not everyone is capable of doing that. The vast majority of people won't put themselves in that situation. So that's really to show how some people like the person you mentioned are meant to push these boundaries and really want to push these boundaries, while most people would just completely back out of it.
So it's interesting. So I think we can agree then, based on this discussion, that pushing boundaries is not for everybody, and there are certain people who kind of lean into it. And definitely debating is an activity where we push boundaries, right? We have to push through our fear. We have to push through our discomfort. We have to push through our mediocrity and try to do something special. So I think if you're drawn to debating, you're kind of already that kind of person who doesn't mind pushing the boundaries. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I wonder, how do we identify people who are those kind of people? Because it seems to me that it's those kind of people that are actually going to be out there changing the world and pushing the envelope and showing us what's possible.
I guess maybe you can get them to sign up for your program and see how long they last.
How long they last. Exactly right. Next up, bad apples. And this insight stemmed from a conversation I had with my wife. And so my wife has this kind of, as you said, an idealistic view of the world, as I'm sure a lot of people do. My wife has faith in people generally, because she has this view that most people are good, decent people, but among us are some bad apples. And those bad people, and our challenge in life is to avoid those bad apples, to stay out of their way, and we'll get through fine if we can identify and avoid those bad apple people. I don't have that view. To me, it's more like we all are bad apples. And we have this inside of us. And our challenge is not to avoid the bad ones. Our challenge is not to trigger anyone from letting their dark side come out. And so my view is that, it's just nature. And people are designed to, I guess, pounce on weakness like a shark that smells blood. And if you show me your weakness, you're gonna give me the temptation to take advantage and exploit it and somehow gain advantage over it. So a challenge is not to avoid the bad apples. The challenge is to not give anyone a reason for their bad apple to come out. What do you think about that?
I think I like both ideas, but I would agree more with your perspective. I think it kind of brings up this idea of morally good and bad, right? And that there is morally good and bad. And I think we're much more complex than that black and white. You know, as a human being, we all have, quote unquote, you know, bad days or where we act a certain way, and from a societal perspective or a cultural moral perspective, that's considered bad. But I think that kind of brings into play, it depends on you, right? Like, let's say you're a hedonist where you pursue pleasure. Anything that you do for yourself is not bad because you're only interested in the pursuit of pleasure, whereas to everyone else, you might seem like a bad apple. And so I think it's absolutely a perspective-based thing. But I think we all have the capacity for bad in us. So not triggering someone's bad apple makes sense. But someone who already has it,
as a teacher, you teach a classroom full of students, and there's always a couple of students that are the bad apple students.
Mm-hmm.
And as a teacher, you learn that it's never the case that the 28 kids that want to be educated and are learning and paying attention bring up those two. It's always the case that those two bring down the level of the entire class.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why teachers have to have a tool to remove the bad apples or deal with them. It used to be corporal punishment, but it's getting harder and harder to deal with bad apple kids. Now, I don't want to pick on kids. There's also bad apple teachers, right? But my insight is they carry more weight than the average person, like that when it kind of infects everybody else. What do you think about that?
So what you're saying then is that those students are letting their bad apples show and therefore bringing out the bad apples in others, correct? Not the other way around. That makes, I mean, I think it makes sense to me. I think there's the propensity for negativity. It's so much easier to be negative than it is to be positive. And I think we all have experience with that, right? In terms of,
you're right.
Let's say something bad happens
to be good. It takes hard work. And that's why I think the natural state of a person is to be indifferent, because it takes no effort at all just to not care.
Mm-hmm.
It takes work to care, to have a stance, to have a position, to think it through. And how many of us are doing that work?
I mean, I think you need to understand the rewards of that work to be doing it, right? Like I personally in my life, I know that that work, the human connection, the relationship that you form is worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it to care. But I think you need to be exposed to that to know its worth. And therefore that bad apple quality, it doesn't have to be intrinsic, if that makes sense. It doesn't have to be a part of you. It has to be kind of taught in a certain sense, or you're not taught the good, let's say, and you've got this. It's so easy to be negative, so you resort to that.
But I wonder, it also reminds me of the black sheep of the family. Is the black sheep of the family innately corrupted, different than everybody else? Or has the rest of the family decided to impose this label, and then because of the labeling theory, you just live up to the name, or you even start to believe that you're a bad apple or a black sheep? What do you think?
Mm-hmm. I think, frankly, I don't think the bad apple or the black sheep, as you say, is intrinsically bad. I think it's all perspective. Right, I think
but then why would a group conspire? Why would a family conspire to make their family member feel this way? Or and I wonder if there's a need for a group to put somebody down to make themselves feel better, or if there's even a need for the bad apple to gain this attention that they otherwise would not have, and then they're going to play into that hand.
Yeah, I think the unknown or the differences kind of, I think it scares you, right? Let's say from a family perspective, if someone is different and the parents don't understand those differences, and it's unknown to them, and they think because they've lived their life a certain way, their entire life. They understand it. They know it works, right?
Yeah.
Because they've gotten to this point. Then they would want their children to understand that in the same sense. And if there's a difference there's a difference in understanding, even between generations, you can see that, right? You know, change in perspective or mindsets around certain contemporary issues, whether political, social, and so on. I think that definitely plays a role, but that difference is not intrinsically bad. I think that's probably, at least to me, that makes sense as to why someone would, in a group, make the group ideology homogenous, because they don't understand.
All right. Moving on to our next insight. This one is called choice. And so I'm fascinated by the idea of choices, decisions, because one of the quotes that comes up in our debating class is, "We are not products of our circumstance. Rather, we are products of our choices and our decisions." And one of the amazing things that I don't know whether people realize, but we make about 250 choices and decisions every single day. Even before we roll out of bed in the morning, but from the time we wake up and roll out of bed, we've made about 10 or 15 decisions and choices. You know, should I hit the snooze button? Should I open my eyes? And so on and so on. And so I always tell my students, so imagine if your whole day consists of 250 choices, and we are the product of our choices. That means if you have a good day, it means because you've made a majority of good choices. And maybe that's what our parents are always on about, because there is room for error, right? You can make 10 bad choices if you have 250, but if you're making majority bad choices, you're going to have a bad day and then a bad year, right, over the course of time. So you cannot choose what you feel, but you can choose what you say and what you do. And so what do you think about all of that?
I think, does that imply then that you are complete control beyond your perspective? Are you in complete control of what happens to you? Because, you have a bad day and you make the right choices. What you're saying is that even if I make all the right choices, then I cannot have a bad day, which doesn't seem.
But no, what I'm saying is, even if you are having a bad day, let's say you've been imprisoned wrongfully and you're innocent sitting in prison, but even in prison, you can make a choice to do hard time, be angry, to rail against the man and fight, or you can make the choice to become educated, to become everyone's lawyer in prison, to gain some kind of reputation for yourself, to do a letter writing campaign. One of the great things about human beings is that we can choose one thought over the other. And I don't think people realize the power that they have. Like, you don't have to become complacent in anything that you're doing. If I'm bored, if I feel like my life is lacking action, I can make a choice to change that. I can make a choice to change that right now. And I think it's very, very, I guess, encouraging, or I just love that idea that we can just make decisions. We're one decision away from a completely different life.
I actually love that, Tamer. I think that's a great way to see things, and you've put in words something that I've tried to implement in my own life, and that's what I would refer to as a big picture mindset. And so we've talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but this to me means that if something happens, if something negative occurs, it's how you see it. It's how your shift in perspective, it's how you deal with it. And that is a choice in itself, right? And it's looking for those silver linings. It's choosing to see maybe this much good in this much bad, but then you still feel that you've taken something from it. It's a growth mindset, right? And it's all about, there will be difficulties. There will be bad days, right? You will make bad choices. Like you said, there is room for error, and there is room for the unpredictable as well, right? For things to just kind of happen and hit you in the face, as they do in life for so many of us. And I think that power of choice of which you speak is overlooked and very special. I completely agree with
it.
You.
Is. I'm glad we talked about it. That's what insights are to me. It's like it's the in-betweens. It's the things that don't get talked about. Remember, the in-between two other topics, we have this one. And in debating terms, what I say, a lot of variables, a lot of things can happen that are unexpected, external things happening to you. And for those things, you have to be just sort of you have to rise to the occasion, be spontaneous. You have to be kind of well trained to deal with spontaneous external factors. But a lot of things in debating are within your control, and you can make the choice to be prepared or not be prepared. And so if you choose to not prepare the things that you can control, and then when those things spin out of control, that's because of your choice. That's something you could have controlled. So I think you have to be, like you said, there's a power in that that's underappreciated or not recognized by most people.
Absolutely. You've said it perfectly.
All right, great.